call out in about 10 seconds.
Engine chill.
And there's that call out indicating that those pre-valves have been opened, and now there's a little bit of that super chilled liquid oxygen flowing through the hardware, basically chilling it out prior to liftoff.
That's right. In the meantime, we're tracking fuel on the vehicle. Stage 2 RP1, or the fuel on the second stage, is complete. It's one of the earlier tanks to be completely filled in the countdown. But as we continue to track the fuel loading, the next thing will be the Stage 1
RP1
load.
Complete.
That's coming up here in about 15 seconds. Later in the countdown, we'll be tracking the tanks of oxidizer being completely filled.
That RP1 load is now complete on the first stage. So at this point in time, all RP1 is now on Falcon 9, both for the first and second stages. LOX load continues, wrapping up at about T-minus 3 minutes for first stage and T-minus 2 minutes for the second stage. Coming up, we'll hear the call for Dragon to...
Dragon, SpaceX, for awareness, we are seeing a T-tab load issue and are troubleshooting. We are currently still go, but have further evaluation before making a final decision. We'll get you a final read before T0.
And SpaceX Dragon comes.
That call out there just communicating to the crew that the launch teams are troubleshooting a small issue with T-Teb, and they will have some more information for the crew in the next couple of minutes. That T-Teb, as I mentioned earlier.
Dragon isn't configured for terminal count.
And there's that call.
Tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
A lot of information coming through right now, just indicating that that Dragon is now on internal power, and now we are basically preparing to retract the strong back, which is the white structure there to the right of the rocket. We will see the clamps open just under those clamps, just under the Dragon trunk. Those will begin to open, and the strong back will retract away from the vehicle.
Yeah, that's right. We'll see those clamps on the top of the structure there, just under the Dragon's trunk, which you can identify by the black solar panels on the left of the base of the capsule itself and to the right. And then the structure itself will lean about 2 degrees, and then it will retract the rest of the way once Dragon actually hits that T0 mark and lifts off. We're seeing those clamps being undone now. The 2-degree lean will be very subtle, and then you'll see it more when we hit that T0 mark.
That's right. At liftoff, Falcon 9 will, or excuse me, the TE will actually retract to 45 degrees to clear the way for Falcon 9. That TE is basically what has the umbilicals that attach to the vehicle that provide power, telemetry, and fluids prior to liftoff.
Now coming up in 10 seconds, we'll be listening for a call on Stage 1 liquid oxygen load being complete.
Dragon is in terminal count and on internal power.
Minus 2 minutes,
this
30
is
seconds.
The LD on countdown 1. Hold, hold, hold. We are standing down due to a T-tab ground issue.
As you just heard, we
Launch
have...
report has started.
As you just heard, we have a hold tonight due to the TTEB issue that I mentioned prior, and the...
Dragon SpaceX with that call from LD, you are go to step into 5.100 launch scrub.
5.100 launch scrub. That's in work.
As with everything else, we are prepared for all scenarios, including, unfortunately, as we've seen tonight, a scrub. So the teams are now stepping into those procedures.
That's right. Again, it was the teams were tracking a ground issue with TTEB. That's the ignition fluid that actually sparks with the oxidizer and allows the engines to fire. The teams were tracking this issue. And so we're in a nominal scrub configuration. We'll start to see sort of a sequence of reversing some of the milestones we've been tracking as part of this countdown until the crew access arm swings back to the side hatch. And so the crew can egress the vehicle as part of a nominal launch scrub.
So for those of you just joining at about just under T minus 2.5 minutes, we unfortunately had a scrub due to a TTEB issue with the ground systems. So as Gary mentioned, we are in a nominal scrub configuration. There we have our procedures now being enacted to basically reverse all the progress that we made this evening, including propellant offload and bringing that crew access arm back into position and getting the astronauts out. Up until that point, everything was looking good. The ground team had reported that issue. I believe it was around T minus 5 minutes. At this point in time, the launch escape system is still armed, with the crew continuing to look comfortable there inside Dragon Endeavour.
And Dragon, LD on countdown 1. At this time, our offloads are underway. Vehicle is safe and proceeding nominally with offload, expecting about a 50-minute offload.
SpaceX Dragon copies about a 50-minute offload. We'll be sitting here waiting. Thanks.
So it will be a very methodical process to offload the Falcon 9 with the propellant and oxidizer. You can see some of that oxygen billowing off still. That'll be part of the sequence. They've also re-enabled auxiliary power by umbilical to the Dragon as they work their way through the nominal scrub timeline. Again, that's a 50-minute offload. For those, again, that are joining, we are in a scrub situation just under 2 minutes and 30 seconds from launch. Teams declared a scrub due to tracking a ground issue with TTEB. This is the ignition fluid that's used for the first and second stages that ignites the oxidizer for igniting the engines themselves to lift Dragon into space. They were tracking this issue and declared a scrub again at the 2-minute 30-second mark. So we're going through a nominal scrub with a 50-minute fuel offload. You can see the strong back clamps have been re-enabled in this view right here. After we offload prop, we'll see the crew access arm swing back to get the crew out. In the meantime, the launch escape system, which enables the Super Dracos to fire should there be any anomaly with the Falcon 9 during the offload procedure. The crew does have the ability to perform a pad abort. Right now, the ground teams are tracking no issues, everything going according to plan for a nominal scrub. All right, for those who are just joining, as a reminder, we are in a scrub at just under 2 minutes, 30 seconds from launch. The ground teams declared a scrub as they were tracking a ground issue with the TTEB ignition fluid. And as a precaution, made a scrub for today's launch as we were counting down to T0. Now we're working our way through nominal scrub procedures, which include offloading the fuel and oxidizer that are loaded on the Falcon 9 right now. You can see we made our way through the countdown to a strong back retract that has been put back into place, and the clamps just under the trunk of Dragon are now in their configuration that they were prior to that part of the countdown. And Kate, we're making our way through offloading that Falcon 9.
That's right. In total, that prop offload is expected to take 50 minutes, 50. So unfortunately, at this point in time, there's not a whole lot that the crew there can do except patiently wait. I could imagine that they might be a little sad as of because otherwise they would be in space at this point, effectively. But right now, as you can see, they are just sitting back and relaxing as the Falcon 9 teams on the ground continue to keep them updated. As Gary said, this is a nominal scrub procedure or configuration. We have procedures listing out every step of this. So right now we are basically unfueling Falcon 9 from both the first and second stages, as Falcon 9 was nearly fully loaded at the time of the scrub. So as this continues, we will see some puffs of white clouds like you just saw there live, as that detanking effectively is underway. We will also see the crew access arm go back into the service position. That will enable the basically the pad team to re-enter the pad, go back up, and help the 4 astronauts that are currently there in the capsule basically unbuckle and get out of the capsule and make their way back down to the ground.
And it is going to be a methodical process. Like you said, Kate, through the fueling that began at T-minus 35 minutes, we made our way quite a bit through the timeline, and those tanks were pretty full. So the ground teams estimated a 50-minute offload of that fuel. In the meantime, the Crew-6 astronauts are in a passive state. They'll be tracking the fuel offloading process and listening to the communications from the ground teams, giving them status updates along the way. But we are in a nominal configuration. In the meantime, they've taken the Dragon Falcon 9 off of internal power and re-enabled auxiliary power back into the vehicle as they continue to go through this process. And like you said, Kate, it'll be a little bit, and then we'll see that crew access arm swing back, and they'll re-access the side hatch. If you were following along on our coverage, they walk down the crew access arm and enter the Dragon through that side hatch. They'll be exiting the same way. In the meantime, through this whole process, the crew and the Dragon itself will remain with the LES, the launch escape system, armed. So if in any event something were to happen as part of the offloading process, they'll be able to escape using the Super Draco engines, the 8 Super Dracos that are on the Dragon. It'll be a pad abort over into the Atlantic Ocean. But for now, all the ground teams are tracking that everything is nominal. The fuel offload is going as planned as part of a normal scrub, and we're just continuing to follow along.
That's right. And one thing I want to mention, although this is not what we had hoped to happen today, and while we said that this is a nominal abort configuration, technically the crew and the launch teams have already practiced this very similar scenario. On Thursday, February 23rd, the integrated launch operations teams, along with the astronauts, performed a full dry dress rehearsal, which basically means a total dress rehearsal, including suit up, transporting to the pad, going up the elevators in the crew tower, down the crew access arm, and ingressing into the capsule, and basically doing a full rehearsal of launch day as if it were real, but no propellant involved. So that's why it's called a dry dress rehearsal, because there was no propellant involved. So technically, this is very similar to what they would have done on Thursday in terms of simulating that scrub and basically having the teams go back up into the crew tower and retrieve the astronauts from the capsule. So at this point in time, we are following along with the procedures for this unfortunate scrub, but everything continues to track nominally for this activity. Right now, for those that have recently joined, we had a hold called on the countdown at about T-minus 2.5 minutes. The crew had reported around T-minus 5 minutes, or excuse me, the ground teams the SpaceX ground teams had reported around T-minus 5 minutes an issue with the TTEB, which is basically the stuff that we use to ignite the engines on the first stage. So out of an abundance of caution, the teams called that hold at T-minus 2.5 minutes and then proceeded into nominal off detanking or basically unloading the vehicle with all of its propellants. Given the fact that that occurred at T-minus 2.5 minutes, the majority of the propellants were already on the vehicle.
SpaceX with a propellant offload update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Offloads are proceeding nominally, anticipating another half hour until closeout.
Understand, looking about a half hour to close out. We copy, thank you.
All right, so good news there coming from the ground teams, indicating that we have about 30 minutes left of the propellant offloading. We heard Commander Steve Bowen sounding pretty unbothered by everything. Like I mentioned before, everything is written down in the procedure. They practiced this very similar egress procedure during Thursday night's dry dress rehearsal. So all in all, everything continuing nominally there for these next steps. As I mentioned before, we will see eventually the crew access arm swing back into the service position, and we will have the pad teams re-enter the pad area and basically enable the astronauts to egress. I also mentioned earlier that our backup launch opportunity is about the same time tomorrow, roughly 24 hours after our initial T0. Due to the fact that we were launching the crew that you see there on the right-hand side of your screen, they were headed to the International Space Station. As such, that is down to the very second in terms of catching up to the International Space Station when launching from Kennedy Space Center. So when it comes to crew launches, there's only one shot. And so therefore, due to that scrub that was called at T-minus 2.5 minutes, that was our only opportunity to launch today.
That's right, Kate. And as you mentioned, that scrub would be 24 hours. So we'll get to do this all over again. You mentioned the dry dress rehearsal. With a nominal offload of the fuel for this particular scrub, this is almost like a wet dress rehearsal, just taking it one step further. As you mentioned, for the dry dress, they did everything that we saw today, driving out to the pad, going up the elevators, and making their way into the vehicle, buckling up. The seats rotated, and they made their way far into the countdown, but before they started fueling the vehicle. Now they fueled the vehicle prior to launch, and again, we're following a scrub that occurred at about 2 minutes and 30 seconds prior to the T0 time. Due to tracking a ground issue with the TTEB ignition fluid that's used on the engines to ignite them and fire the crew into orbit and eventually catching up with the International Space Station. But as they were continuing to look at this issue, decided to declare a scrub for today. That scrub is, again, a nominal scrub, so we'll be going through the scrub procedures, which include the detanking. They seem to be going a little faster than originally predicted. They called out to the crew about 50 minutes. Now we're inside 30 minutes from detanking the Falcon 9. That means the RP-1 refined kerosene and the liquid oxygen, that's the densified liquid oxygen that's on board, is being brought back into the lines that fuel them. So we'll be emptying those tanks. You can still see some of the oxygen, some of the gaseous oxygen billowing off the Falcon 9 rocket itself. So there is a little bit of fuel in there. You're seeing some of the puffs that are part of the detanking process. In the meantime, just a reminder that that launch escape system is armed through the whole thing just to keep the crew safe. But you see, for the crew themselves, it's a very passive experience, the launch scrub, all of these commands being issued by the teams on the ground. They'll continue to wait until and get status updates from the ground teams. Right now, they are connected by umbilical. We did hear that as part of the normal countdown, the Falcon 9 transferred to internal power, but they re-enabled auxiliary power back into the vehicle. So through the detanking process, we're getting power from the ground and not relying on the batteries inside the vehicles, so we can continue to work through this process. Again, Steve Bowen, Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al-Niyati, and Andrei Fedyaev on board. Crew Dragon Endeavour now passively waiting for the scrub process, detaking fuel first. This is going to be one of the lengthier processes before the crew access arm swings back and allows the crew to egress or exit the Dragon vehicle and get back on the ground. We'll do the same thing again in about 24 hours. Witnessing the same series of events, suiting up in the suit room before going down and making their way over to the pad via Tesla until they make their way up the launch tower, the elevators over there, and make their way back into the same vehicle. We'll continue to follow along and give you updates as we hear them. Right now, really, it's just the detanking process, which is quite a lengthy process, so we'll continue to keep you updated there. That is still underway. That's one of the longer events that occur as part of a normal scrub. From left to right, Andrei Fedyaev, Woody Hoberg, Steve Bowen, Sultan Al-Niyati on board at Crew Dragon Endeavour now. Now we'll continue to follow along through this process, but from here over in Hawthorne, we're now going to toss it back over to the Kennedy Space Center, where again we scrubbed at about 2 minutes 30 seconds to take us through and continue to give us updates along the scrub process. Daryl.
All right, thanks so much, Gary. Back here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Daryl Nail, and I'm with Crew 3 Commander, NASA astronaut Raj Achari. And it goes without saying, Raja, looks like you're going to have to wait on seeing your first launch. As Gary mentioned, we had a scrub at right around 1:43 a.m. Eastern Time. Got down inside T-minus 10 minutes, and they started to notice an issue with what's called TTAB, and these are the chemicals that help ignite the Falcon 9 engines, all 9 of them. And as it turned out, it looks like there wasn't enough confidence in moving forward with the amount of TTAB that was there to light those engines, and so we had a scrub called. And so now, from the astronaut's perspective, Raja, you're sitting in there. First of all, tell me about what kind of reacts.
Yeah, so I think it's good and bad, right? The bad side is obviously, you're ready to go, been waiting for it, but I think what's really encouraging and what, especially we're appreciative as the astronauts is knowing that everyone's got our back and that safety is the paramount thing. So as much as everyone wants to go, the right thing to do is obviously, in this case, to scrub. And so I think that's really easy to remember when you're in the seat and when you're dealing with, as you go through the process of de-arming the launch escape system, all those steps just remind you like, oh yeah, the safety's got to be first. I think it's also kind of a good deal because it gets a free run through of all the events and the timeline. So now they've seen it all once. They have the wet dress, but now you've taken it all the way down to near launch, and you get another run of that, another run through the procedures. We talked earlier in the night about sleep shifting, so they're already sleep shifted. That's why we do it that way, so that they're, you can continue and no earlier than tomorrow another launch opportunity. So I think that's kind of what's going through the mind right now. You heard earlier the call up from the core to get into 5.100, so that's the procedure they're running now. Earlier in the night, they're using 4.100 as the procedure name, and that was the launch prep, and this is the scrub prep. And so as a rough rule of thumb, what they teach the crew is about as long as you were fueling, it'll take that long to defuel. So since we were pretty deep into the count, you would expect to take that amount of time to basically take all the fuel out of the rocket. So the big picture is the crew's going to stay there just like they were ready for launch with the visors down, completely restrained, because the rocket still has prop on board. And so the launch escape system is still armed. So it is still a volatile machine.
There's propellant on board.
Exactly. So they still, so we still have to treat it as if it's ready to go, as it is ready to go. Mm-hmm. Then once the prop is all off, then they can disarm the launch escape system, bring the crew access arm back out, and then egress the vehicle. So essentially what we saw earlier in the night, just run back in reverse. And then I think it's also a good example. You mentioned like inside T-minus 10 minutes is when we started to see some ground chatter and know there was an issue. You didn't hear that on the loops to the crew. And one of the reasons is, we work a lot in training to figure out like, what do you tell the crew? What don't you tell the crew? But generally speaking, if there's nothing the crew can do about something, or, in this case, there's an action being worked, then maybe it would maybe potentially only confuse the situation to give them extraneous information. In this case, once they had actionable info, like, hey, we're going to scrub, or we're looking at this, that's when they call it up, versus just peppering them with random pieces of information that may or may not be relevant. In today's case, it turned out to be relevant, but they let them know that once that was the case. But yeah, I think from the crew standpoint, this is something we, just about, honestly, our launch was the first time we ever had an event where nothing went wrong, because in all the sims you do, something generally goes wrong. That's the whole point. Right. So if this is actually par for the course, that you're like, oh yeah, of course, of course something happened, because that's what always happens in the sims.
That's how you sim.
Yeah, that's how you sim. So I think it's unexpected, and with I think we relearn this every time we launch a vehicle, whether it's Artemis, SpaceX Dragon, a Starliner. We always learn things, and you can never assume everything's going to go perfectly. So I don't think it surprises anyone. Not to say that they're not disappointed. There's still that.
That's probably the first emotion.
The first thing
reaction,
is like,
right?
oh man, but then like, oh, that's good.
Right.
They made the safe decision. But yeah, absolutely a little disappointed. But you're still going to get to go to space. We'll just maybe do it a day or two later.
And currently, according to SpaceX, when they initially made the announcement, it takes about 50 minutes to detank the rocket. And currently, we're right around a half hour left in that process, so we've gone about 20 minutes in detanking. As you mentioned, astronauts have to stay strapped in exactly where they are to wait it out as that propellant is detanked. And I found that you can kind of get a visual marker by what you see right here, right? You can see
some venting and
venting of the locks at the top, but then also just about as high as that condensation is coming off the
Dragon
rocket.
SpaceX with propellant offload update.
Now we'll get an update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Our stage 2 LOX tank is offloaded. We're still tracking about another 25 to 30 minutes here. Last estimate may have been a little low.
SpaceX Dragon copy. Thank you for the update.
So about halfway done.
About halfway, and you can see
yeah,
it's
you're
almost about halfway down.
I actually never noticed that before, but that's actually a really good insight.
And so now the astronauts are waiting in the capsule. SpaceX is looking at, and will look at after this procedure is complete, what's going on with the hardware. There is a launch opportunity tomorrow, and I want to emphasize this is an opportunity. If the team decides that they can turn it around in 24 hours. And that would be with a T0 of 1:22 and 29 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. Again, tomorrow, well, this would be Tuesday, February 28th, with a T0 of 1:22 and 29 seconds a.m. There is a launch opportunity. If NASA and SpaceX decide to go forward with that, our coverage on NASA TV would start at 9:45 p.m., both on NASA TV and our streaming platforms. Also, from launch to dock, that transit would be about 33 and a half hours. So if they decide to launch on that day, docking would happen on March 1st at 10:04 Eastern Time. And there'd be a rendezvous, docking, and welcoming ceremony coverage on NASA TV that would start at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And I say all that, again, with the asterisk that that is a decision that has yet to be made, whether or not they take that launch opportunity. There's going to be a time to look at this situation.
Right, and so like we heard that it was a situation with the T-tab, which is again sort of the, if you will, the igniter for the engines and making sure the fluid, there's enough fluid or sufficient fluid. So whatever that, whatever the technical underlying of that problem that led to today, if that's something that can be resolved, and obviously that's something the teams will be diving into probably as soon as the prop is off the rocket. I'm sure they're going to be crawling all over it. And that's one of the other logistical things that's happening here. So there's, once they start fueling the rocket as part of the countdown sequence and the crew armed the launch escape system, all the personnel around there also cleared out. And so right now there is no one really close to the rocket. So once the fuel is off the rocket and then the crew de-arms the LES, then people can approach again. So it does take some time for the vehicles and people and the closeout crew, just like it did to clear out the arm and prep it. They'll have to do the same thing to bring people back to the arm, re-prepare it to connect to the capsule. But again, it's actually in the long run kind of a good thing is when they do try this the second time, it means it'll go all the more smoother because they'll have got another rep of doing it. You mentioned the one thing having a longer time to rendezvous, the 33 hours. Actually, that's kind of another little maybe a positive silver lining out of this, because I know for us, for Crew 3, we really enjoyed our time in the capsule. You spend so much time training in Hawthorne, training in Houston, and there's something special, I think, about being in a small vehicle. Yes, it's cramped, so I wouldn't necessarily want to spend 2 weeks in there, but more than a few hours is just kind of fun because
Stop, catch your breath,
exactly,
relax.
Yeah. Because once you hit the space station, you are on a tight timeline. Everything, every 5 minutes is accounted for, and it should be because it's expensive to get there, and we're doing a whole lot of science. The nice thing in the vehicle when you're just rendezvousing or waiting for those, we talked about phasing the orbits, you get time to just look out the window, hang out with your buds. It's kind of like a glamping trip. It's like, because you're sort of roughing it, but obviously it's some pretty nice digs.
But you can get out of your seat, right?
Exactly, and that's so it's a great time. So once they get in orbit and everything's checked out, they do get out of their seats. They can change out of their suits, and I thought that was some of the best time, both on the way up and the way down, just spending time in the Dragon and in the thing that you've trained in so long. And you can really hear it. It talks to you. You can hear when you do burns. You'll hear the prop flowing. You can see the thrusters out the window. So it's a nice time, and it gives you some time to adapt to space. So for especially our crew, just like their crew, having 3 rookies on board, getting some time to adapt to zero gravity, getting used to moving around, how you restrain yourself. The more time you can get in the Dragon, the quicker you can adapt and get to work on the space station. So I think it's all time well spent when you have a few extra hours in the Dragon.
Raj has talked a lot about the crew and what that means for them potentially going forward. Want to go back to the TTAB. We've mentioned this and heard it a couple of times. I think one of our commentators actually spelled it out. If you look at the picture on the left, the SpaceX rocket on the pad, for those who are familiar with watching launches at night, that TTAB, it's the ignition fluid. You can actually see it light because it flashes green all around the bottom of the rocket. You can see a green flash, and that's what it does. It lights those 9 Merlin engines, and then you have a liftoff. And they call it TTAB because that's the acronym for triethyl aluminum triethyl boron. And when they come together, they create that that ignition that's necessary to light the rocket. And so that's something that SpaceX is going to look at. We also heard an update from SpaceX on the loops about the timing of the D-tank, which we are currently just about 27 minutes into that process. As astronaut Raja Chari was saying, this is a period of time where the astronauts just have to hold still while the propellant is taken out of the rocket.
Yep, and they're probably also going through. So we're always trying to think what if. That's always what's going through our mind. So right now they're probably thinking through. Well, the LES is still hot, so that was, but we're not planning on going. So if there was a problem, we'd probably hit the emergency ground egress button, wait for the crew arm to swing out at that faster rate.
Well, crew arm,
sorry.
attached,
yep,
right?
So but you would still want to, if you had to get out quickly, do the emergency ground egress. Make sure the LES is disarmed before you get out of your seats. And then egress if you had to, and so there's a few different ways, a few different types of egress if something else went wrong, and so whenever prop is moving, whether it's getting onloaded or offloaded, you're always ready for that.
So that LES stays armed through this process?
It actually stays armed as long as there's propellant on the rocket. It stays armed because if there was any kind of contingency, you'd want to use that to get off quickly. The other thing that will have to happen eventually is they'll have to rotate the seats back. So just like we saw the seats rotate to the launch position, once the LES is disarmed, then they'll rotate back to the loading and unloading configuration. There's also, we didn't talk about it too much, but it's not just people that the Dragon takes up there, it's cargo. And so you can't really see in this view. We saw it earlier in the night when they were first loading up, you got a shot underneath their legs. Yeah, exactly. And so you could see the cargo that's under there, and that the stuff on the left under Andre's seat is mostly crew related in terms of like survival equipment. You see that red, you can kind of just see the red bag. That's the life raft. And so you saw that video earlier tonight. We talked about the Orion, the porch, and the Orion water training. So a lot of the water recovery equipment is in those pallets underneath Andre's seat. If the crew had to do something on their own for some kind of landing in an unplanned area. And then this stuff that's kind of under Woody and Steve's seats, you can see they look more like metal lockers. And so those positions actually have power. So under Andre and Sultan's seats, there's no power to those locations, those cargo locations, but the ones under Woody and Steve, they actually have power, which means you can cool or heat things. But generally, when you're talking about science, going up and back from the station, oftentimes you need to keep stuff frozen or temperature controlled. And so those usually probably the more valuable, I shouldn't valuable, but like the more time critical stuff is in those. And so more than likely when they offload the crew, probably won't be on camera anymore, but they'll probably also go in and either take some of that stuff out if there's anything that has to be chilled or temperature controlled to make sure it's still in a good state. And then when you dock with the station, those are some of the first things that come off to make sure that they get into
Dragon,
the right.
SpaceX with propellant offload update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Offloads are proceeding nominally, expecting another 15-20 minutes here.
SpaceX Dragon, copy, thank you.
And that's Captain Stephen Boeing communicating with the launch team.
Exactly, yep, in about another 15 to 20 minutes, and sounds like things are going nominally. But yeah, so the those pallets underneath there, like I said, they may, I'm not exactly sure what's in those particular ones, but it would not be uncommon to pull some of that stuff, they call it like late load cargo that, you know, is very sensitive to temperature or maybe some power considerations that you would pull off and store. And then, like I said, when you dock, those are the first things that come out. But again, the kind of takeaway is it's not just people, but a whole bunch of stuff that goes to the space station by way of the Dragon. And then you can also put things in the trunk as well. On like the cargo Dragons, we saw it earlier tonight, the solar panels, but you can load things into the trunk. Here's a great shot of it. So that bottom section that looks with the solar panels in the black and the white inside
on
there,
one side,
yep,
and, yeah,
you can actually put things inside there as well. That obviously doesn't have to be in a nice atmosphere, or so it's things that can be exposed to vacuum.
All right, good stuff. NASA astronaut Raja Chari keeping us informed and updated on what the astronauts are going through and what it means for the cargo on board. I want to now take a moment to go back to SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, and get caught up with our NASA commentator, Gary Jordan. Gary?
Hey, thank you, Daryl. Yeah, we're following along here in Mission Control Hawthorne. As you mentioned, that status update on the fuel offloading, we're looking at about 15-20 minutes until that is completed. In the meantime, you see the Crew-6 astronauts on board inside Crew Dragon Endeavour, passively waiting. They'll be going through a series of more steps once fuel offloading is complete. In the meantime, the Dragon is going to, or the Falcon 9 is going to continue to get rid of the fuel and the oxidizer that's inside the Falcon 9. The seats themselves will rotate from the launch position down so that the closeout team can come back and get them out of their seats. They'll open up that side hatch and get the crew back, walk down the crew access arm, down the elevators, and go back to crew quarters to await for the next launch attempt. Right now, the next launch attempt we're looking at is about 24 hours from now. But right now, if you're just tuning in and looking for updates on the launch of the Crew Dragon to the International Space Station, we are in a launch scrub situation. So at about 2 minutes 30 seconds, the ground teams declared a scrub due to tracking what's called a TTEB. This is the ignition fluid that allows the engines on the first and second stage to ignite and propel the Falcon 9 and the crew into orbit over the 9-minute ascent. Usually, if you follow our coverage, TTEB, when the second stage ignites at about 3 minutes into the flight of the Falcon 9, there's this green flash that you see from the MVAC engine at the tip, and then the titanium stabilization ring at the end of the expansion nozzle goes away after that TTEB ignition and the second stage ignites. That green flash is the TTEB ignition fluid, and you can actually see it in our launch coverage. But it was that the ground teams were tracking, and so they identified a ground issue and are now going through the stages of a nominal scrub situation. Just regular tank offloading. We were originally looking at about 50 minutes of tank offloading. Now we're about 15-20 minutes from the latest report of the ground teams. In the meantime, the Crew-6 astronauts are aboard, passively waiting and tracking the fuel offload. And why don't we check in with Kate for more on the scrub situation?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I am following along with the SpaceX ground team's procedures as we are continuing through this nominal scrub. As we heard called out a couple minutes ago, we have about 15 to 20 minutes left of the offload, so that should wrap up between around between 2:30 and 4:30 a.m. Eastern time. So we're coming up to that soon. Everything progressing nominally. Looking at the current levels, I'm expecting a call out to occur any minute now, indicating that all RP1 has been detanked from the second stage. So liquid oxygen detanking has already completed from the second stage. So I'm expecting that call out to come any second now, indicating that RP1 has been completely detanked. As for the first stage, also really low levels there. I would say less than 5% remaining locks on the first stage to go, and then probably about 10% fuel left to go there on the first stage. So we're nearly there, but we will hear those progress call outs on the loops informing the crew. As you can see there on the right-hand side of your screen, they remain comfortable in their seats, visors down, seats rotated back. The launch escape system is still armed at this point, although from that view of the pad on the left-hand side of your screen, it might kind of look like the crew access arm is reaching toward the capsule. It's not. We have not moved that yet into the service position, and we won't do that for a little bit yet, but we still have a number of things that we're going to go through in this nominal offload procedure. As I mentioned before, the crew had a dry dress rehearsal on Thursday night, meaning no propellant involved. So that's what makes it a dry dress. But they have gone through this very similar procedure in terms of the closeout team going back up into the tower, back down the crew access arm, and helping the crew get out of the capsule, including reopening that side hatch. So the astronauts will egress from the capsule the exact same way that they ingressed, just in reverse. So pretty simple from that standpoint, but there are also other things that we'll have to do in addition to that fuel detanking or offloading and the disarming of that launch escape system. We will also check with the hypergol sensors, those hypergolic fluids, monomethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, that MMH and NTO. Those are the fuels that are used to power Dragon when it's in orbit, and they are toxic to humans to breathe. So we will engage those sensors and make sure that there's a zero, that there's no presence of those propellants prior to allowing the closeout team return to the White Room. We'll also make sure that the closeout crew themselves are prepared and ready to re-enter the BDA, or blast danger area. So it's basically everything that they did earlier today, but in reverse. And then another thing that we will also do is we will release the range assets. So of course, all of that all of that sea and airspace that we had closed off in preparation for launch. After that launch escape system is disabled, we'll be able to basically release or free up all of those range assets that are still currently locked down, just in case a launch abort, a Dragon abort, a pad abort in this case, would be triggered. But as we mentioned before, everything continues to progress nominally with no issues.
Dragon SpaceX with a propellant offload update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
At this time, we have RP1 in locks off of stage 2, expecting just another 5 minutes or so here until we are fully offloaded.
SpaceX Dragon copy, thank you.
So that was SpaceX Core Arthur Barialt, just informing the crew that there's about 5 minutes remaining, as I mentioned before. At this point in time, the second stage is now completely, or mostly empty, completely empty of its propellants. The LOX tank on the first stage is nearly empty, and the fuel tank on the first stage has maybe about 5% remaining to be pulled out. So everything continuing nominally with this offload. We heard there Commander Steve Bowen. As I mentioned earlier, he sounds pretty relaxed and cool as an ice cube here, and for good reason. The astronauts train for every possible scenario, this included. As we've mentioned several times before, we have procedures for everything. I am following along with this scrub procedure, and everything continues to go as planned, which is kind of funny to say for an event that we obviously didn't want to happen tonight, but as John Innsbrucker reminded me a little bit ago, the the Mercury flight director said back in the early days of the space program, it's better to be on the ground wishing you were flying than to be flying wishing you were on the ground. So this is a good example of the system doing exactly what it was supposed to do. In the case of off-nominal TTEB readings, there was a scrub called at about 2 minutes and 30 seconds prior to liftoff, and that was an issue that the crew had that the ground teams had informed the crew of around T-minus 5 minutes, had indicated that they would need a couple more minutes to troubleshoot the problem, and ultimately called that scrub at T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So at this point in time, the crew remains in their chairs. Unfortunately, not a whole lot for them to do other than continue to monitor using their crew displays, continue to monitor the progress of the propellant offloading and the overall vehicle health. But as I mentioned before, the commander's tone of voice indicates that everyone is, I'm sure, disappointed that they didn't get to go to space today, but unbothered or not worried about what we're walking through, as we have practiced a similar scenario very recently with that dry dress rehearsal just this past Thursday evening. So after we fully detank the vehicle, we will be able to disarm the launch escape system and then bring that crew access arm, which a great shot there on the left-hand side of your screen of it stowed away. We will basically rotate it back into its service position, and the close-out team will, I guess it will be the opposite, more of like a close-in team. They will return to the pad and go back up to the side hatch, reopen it, and help the astronauts out of their seats.
That's right, Kate. And again, we're getting that live view from inside the Dragon. They are passively waiting. It's the ground teams monitoring the detanking process, which we're really just minutes away from finishing. In the meantime, we continue to keep that launch escape system armed just to make sure the crew is safe through the process. Now, after that detanking is complete, one of the next steps will be to disarm the launch escape system. When the Falcon 9 is not fueled, it's in a safe configuration to go ahead and disarm that and go through the next series of steps, including that crew access arm swinging back and retrieving the crew. Now, Crew-6 will have another opportunity to launch. Right now, we're tracking a 24-hour turnaround for the next launch attempt. Of course, the teams on the ground will have to evaluate and continue to evaluate the issue that was identified as part of today's launch scrub. And again, that was a ground issue identified with the TTEB ignition fluid that allows the first and second stage engines to ignite and propel the Falcon 9 and the Dragon into orbit. So they'll continue to talk and discuss about the issues before going ahead and proceeding with that next attempt, but we have that identified. If we were to proceed with a launch attempt tomorrow, again, today's launch attempt, we were counting down to 1:45 a.m. Eastern time. For tomorrow, for a 24-hour scrub, it's just about 24 hours, a little shy of that. So we'd be looking at about 1:22 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow for our next attempt. In the meantime, we're continuing to follow along, just really minutes away from completely detanking the Falcon 9. So we'll continue to follow along and get this next status update until that's completely detanked and we hear that they're disarming the launch escape system. All right, so Kate, we're continuing to follow along, really just sitting and waiting at this point for that detanking process, but we should be expecting to hear something from the ground teams very shortly.
Yeah, that's right. We continue to see the crew remaining buckled in their seats, keeping their hands inside the ride at all times, for a lack of a better analogy. Yeah, their visors remain in the closed position. This, of course, is, as you just mentioned, the launch escape system is still armed. So while it is armed, the crew will stay exactly as you see them now. This is just in case for some reason, a Dragon pad abort is required. As I mentioned before, not likely, but it's a good backup. Of course, crew safety is the top priority at all times, even as we work through this nominal scrub procedure. So we will see the crew remain like this until further notice, basically. Checking in on vehicle status here, as I mentioned before. The second stage completely empty of all of its propellants. The first stage LOX tank also basically completely empty. I'm seeing a tiny little bit of fuel, that RP1, rocket propellant 1, still coming off of the first stage tank there. But for the most part, Falcon 9 is basically entirely empty of its propellants at this point in time. So as I mentioned before, we were expecting this to wrap up sometime between 2:30 a.m. and 2:40 a.m. Eastern time. So now at 2:33, we are in that range. So we should be hearing momentarily from SpaceX core Arthur Berrialt, located here at SpaceX Hawthorne Mission Control, just behind Gary and I. We should hear from him soon, indicating that the propellant offloading is complete and that we will then prepare to disarm the launch escape system. So for those that have recently tuned in, we had a nominal countdown. The SpaceX teams reported a issue with the TTEB, basically the fluids that we use to ignite the Merlin engines. You can kind of think of it like the spark plug to your car if you drive a combustion engine vehicle. So that TTEB is a critical component to getting the rocket to fly. It's what creates the spark for that engine ignition. So we heard around T-minus 5 minutes that the SpaceX teams were troubleshooting an issue, and then about 2.5 minutes later, at T-minus 2 minutes 30 seconds, there was a scrub called in the launch countdown. But as I said, prior to that, we had a nominal countdown, and now just working through this this scrub procedure.
Dragon, SpaceX with a propellant offload update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
At this time, we have all propellant off the vehicle and are proceeding with nominal closeouts.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
All right, so that's an important call. Propellant load, or the propellant offload rather, being complete. So we'll be tracking to see when the launch escape system gets disarmed. Right now it's still armed, just as a precautionary measure as the ground teams continue to track the
Dragon
propellant.
SpaceX, with that call, you are go for section 2 of 5.100 and disarm launch escape system.
Here we go.
All right, and I'm not sure what call that was that you're referring to, other than that we are go for 2.1
break.
for launch escape system safely.
And copy that. Good read back, Dragon.
Okay, we are in launch escape system safing. We are 2 Alpha 1, and we're at 2 Alpha 2 with disarm the launch escape system.
So again, if you're just tuning in, the ground teams we're tracking propellant offload. So it'll be the crew themselves inside Crew Dragon Endurance that issues the command to turn off. The launch escape system will wait for confirmation of that command being successfully issued to the Dragon system. All right, and it looks like we got that confirmation that the launch escape system has been inhibited. So that confirms the propellant offload and the launch escape system being disarmed. So the crew will work through a series of commands.
We're going to go with advisors and proceed to step 3. And SpaceX Dragon, we are ready for a steep rotation.
SpaceX copies will report when initiating.
Okay, so recap of what happened. We declared a scrub inside 2 minutes 30 seconds. That scrub time was actually 2 minutes 14 seconds.
Dragon SpaceX initiating
and we
rotation.
scrubbed for the day. Since then, we've been in a nominal scrub procedure, so it was followed. So we're continuing to follow along. And that crew access arm, we did get confirmation. You can see it visually, actually. It is swinging back into place to access the side hatch on the side of Crew Dragon Endeavour. So again, the Falcon 9 is completely offloaded with fuel and oxidizer, and the launch escape system has been disarmed. Those commands confirmed before going ahead and swinging the crew access arm back. You heard the command for seat rotation, so we may be able to see that. And for launch, the seat rotates up to about a 14-degree angle. That's the launch position. The seat rotation goes down to about a 40-degree angle
SpaceX
to allow.
Seats are in the upright position.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
So there we can see the crew access arm closing the final inches as it moves back toward Dragon Endeavour. We are now pulling the closeout team to re-enter the BDA, or blast danger area. So as we've mentioned before, they will go back up the tower, back down the crew access arm, reopen that side hatch and help the astronauts egress from the capsule. As we heard called out earlier, the seats are back down in, so they were in the launch position. They've rotated back down into the ingress position. So we can see the crew access arm just closing the final inches up against Dragon Endeavour. At this point in time, we're going to head back over to Kennedy Space Center's Daryl for additional updates. I'm sure that they can see they were able to see that crew access arm move from their seats at the press site. Daryl, how are things over there?
Thank you, Kate. And yes, indeed, we could see the crew access arm coming back and making a connection with Dragon Endeavour. And as you see on the screen there, the white room, connected back in. And so as we watch, the astronauts can unbuckle and pull up their visors, take a moment to relax, and from here on, Commander Chari, looks like they'll be heading out at some point.
They should be, yeah. And at this point, the vehicle's pretty much completely safe. So with the LES disarmed or safed, there's basically no longer active prop in the F9, and also the Super Dracos are safed on the vehicle. So that completes their procedure 5.100, which is the one they're running inside the vehicle. At this point, they're just waiting for the recovery crew to show up. Like was mentioned earlier, they have to stay outside an exclusion area while there's any potential of propellants or the abort engines kicking off. And so now that that's safe, those teams will approach the vehicle. You can see they loosen their straps. One of the questions we were talking about while we were listening to SpaceX was why don't they just get out on their own, which they could. But we mentioned before that whole white room is a clean room, and so if they were to get out on their own, they maybe like scuff a boot, touch a hatch seal, and since all those things we want to keep really pristine, there's no rush right now. There's no reason to risk anything like that. Bumping a visor, scratching something, tearing a rubber seal. So the safest thing to do, since we're going to have to do this again on the next opportunity, is to let the closeout crew come and make sure they help them out and make sure nothing gets damaged or anything like that on the way out, and preserve the opportunity, those follow-on opportunities. The good news is the next opportunities will probably go faster because everyone's done it once now, so they've got some more practice. They don't have to sign the patch, like you said. They've knocked that out, so we save ourselves a few seconds here and there. And again, that's for the crew. Although there's some disappointment of like, oh, you didn't get to go, but it feels a lot just like another sim and another chance to go through the procedures, another chance, because like we talked about, once that rocket lights, things happen really, really fast. So the more times you have to walk through it and talk through it, and especially in a case like this, we're actually sitting in the seats with the displays up, hearing the vehicle sounds, that in and of itself is a worthwhile experience, and it makes you more perceptive if things aren't nominal. So the next time if you hear a sound, they're like, well, that's different than what we heard before, and have a baseline for comparison. Looks like Woody's playing with his box settings, so now that their visor's up, they're probably changing their settings just so they're not getting background noise. You can see they're starting to get their gloves out,
unzip,
getting their hands out, and just get a little more just cool off, and just kind of hanging out and relaxing waiting for the crew to come get them.
So Crew-6 did a dry dress just a few days ago. We could think of this as a wet dress.
Exactly,
right?
Yep. This one had the prop.
And so the more experience they get, the better off they'll be for the next attempt. Just to recap, if you're just joining us, we scrubbed the launch attempt at T-minus 2 minutes and 14 seconds before liftoff. There was a hold in the countdown, happened at 1:43 a.m. Eastern Time. The SpaceX team encountered an issue in the ground system affecting the loading of triethyl aluminum and triethyl boron, which together, the acronym TTAB, they are the ignition fluids for F9. The ground team couldn't provide sufficient confidence of a full load of that TTAB, which is important to light all 9 of the Merlin 1D engines underneath the Falcon 9. So the team scrubbed it, and now they're going through their procedures for launch scrub. And so moving forward, we have some launch opportunities coming up for Crew-6. I mentioned the first one on February 28th. There's also another one on March 2nd at 12:34 a.m. Eastern Time.
Yeah.
And if we were to go then, we would begin our NASA TV coverage on March 1st at 9:30 p.m. And there would be a docking at 1:05 a.m. Eastern Time on March 3rd. Also want to make a note that there is no press conference tonight. Initially, that was scheduled. Had there been a nominal launch, but in this case, NASA is foregoing the opportunity for a press conference, and so stay tuned to your social media channels and NASA's official commercial crew blog.
We've pulled go for the closeout team to start re-entering the BDA, and they'll be back alongside you at the capsule shortly and helping you egress. Additionally, just want to do a quick comfort check, make sure you guys are still feeling okay sitting there, and if you need a PMC, I can set one up.
And wait for Captain Bowen to respond.
And SpaceX Dragon, we're all feeling good, just waiting on the opportunity to get out of the capsule, that's all.
All right, SpaceX copies.
Yeah, so the call there you heard was that gives the crew some SA that the recovery crew is going to be approaching, because if they do hear bumps or see shadows or silhouettes moving outside the windows, you can't see, you don't have direct line of sight into the room, but you can see maybe some movement or light changes, and that lets you know that's people that's intended versus something off-nominal happening. And then a PMC stands for a private medical conference, and as you heard, they're doing fine, just waiting to get out.
And so that's going to do it for our coverage of Crew-6, the first attempt of Crew-6 to launch to the International Space Station aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon Endeavour. Didn't get to do it today. Roger, you're going to have to wait to see your first launch.
Yeah.
But good things come to those who wait, and so I want to thank you for being here.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was a fun time. I'm sure I'll get to see a launch eventually. So, as you mentioned, those follow-on launch opportunities. Right now, I'm sure the teams are going to be continuing to work through breakfast and lunch to figure out if they can fix the problem and when we'll be ready to go. But we'll go when it's safe and ready to go. So
absolutely, NASA's ethos will launch when we're ready. And so that's going to wrap up our coverage for this evening. Thank you for watching Crew-6's launch attempt to the International Space Station. I'm Daryl Nail for Raja Chari and everyone at NASA. Thank you for watching and have a great morning.